Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Golden Goose. Once, in a quiet village nestled between fields and forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 3 sons. The eldest was strong and thought himself clever. The second was shrewd and sharp of tongue, but the youngest, who was small, awkward, and dreamy, was called the Simpleton. All mocked him, his brothers laughed, his parents despaired, and the neighbors shook their heads. For whenever he tried to help, he stumbled. Whenever he spoke, others dismissed him. And so, day after day, he was despised, laughed at, and neglected. One morning, the eldest son rose early and said, "Father, today I shall prove my strength. I will go into the forest and cut wood." His mother, proud of him, packed for him a fine meal, a golden brown pancake, thick with butter, and a flask of rich red wine to warm him in the cold shadows of the wood. Thus provisioned, he set off with a confident stride. Deep in the forest he came upon a little old gray man, bent and wrinkled, with kind but weary eyes. The man greeted him, "Good day, good youth. I am hungry and thirsty from my wandering. Pray, share a bite of your cake and a sip of your wine." But the eldest scowled and answered sharply, "Share with you? Then what should I eat myself? Be off, old beggar." He turned away, leaving the little man standing sorrowful in the shade of the trees. Yet hardly had he set his axe to a trunk when he struck awry. The blade glanced and bit into his own arm. The wound bled deep. He could not work, but was forced to stagger home in shame. That was the consequence of scorning the little gray man. Soon after, the second son declared that he too would go to the forest. His mother gave him a pancake and a flask, and with proud words sent him off. As with his brother, the little gray man appeared, greeted him, and begged humbly for a morsel and a sip. But the second son curled his lip. "Why should I lessen my portion for you? What I give you I lose myself. Go your way, old fool." And proud of his clever refusal, he strode on. But punishment followed swiftly. As he hewed at a tree, the axe slipped and cut deep into his leg, so that he collapsed and had to be carried home, groaning by the villagers. At last, the simpleton said timidly, "Father, let me go for once into the forest to cut wood." His father laughed bitterly. "Your brothers, who are skilled and strong, have both hurt themselves. You, poor fool, will fare no better. Stay at home." But the boy pleaded with such gentle insistence that finally the father relented. "Very well. Go and learn by experience. Perhaps pain will teach you what sense cannot." The mother sighed, and for him she baked no fine cake, but only a rough round of dough mixed with water, baked in the ashes until hard. To this she added a flask of sour beer. "There," she said, "that is fitting for such a one as you." Yet the simpleton took it gratefully and set off. In the forest, as before, the little old gray man appeared. His eyes, though weary, seemed to glimmer with hidden light. "Good day, kind youth. I am faint with hunger and thirst. Will you share a piece of your cake and a drink from your flask?" The simpleton bowed his head and said, I have only a poor cake of ash bread and a flask of sour beer. But if that pleases you, let us sit together and share." So they sat on a mossy stone, and when the boy broke the coarse cake, lo, it became a golden pancake, rich and sweet, and when he raised the flask, it held fragrant wine. They ate and drank, and the little man smiled. "Because you have shown me kindness, where your brothers showed me scorn, I will bestow good fortune upon you. There stands an old tree, cut it down, and among its roots you will find a treasure." With that, the little man vanished as mist before the sun. The simpleton hastened to the tree, swung his axe with steady strokes, and when the trunk fell, he beheld a marvel. There, nestled among the roots, was a goose with feathers of pure gold, gleaming brighter than the noonday sun. He lifted it gently, astonished, and carried it to a nearby inn, where he planned to spend the night. Now the innkeeper had 3 daughters, curious and covetous. When they saw the golden goose, their hearts burned with desire for a feather each. The eldest, waiting for a moment when the simpleton left the room, crept forward and seized the goose by its wing. But instantly her hand stuck fast, as though glued by unseen force. The second sister, eager not to be outdone, reached to pull her away. But the moment she touched her, she too was held fast. Then came the third, who laughed at their cries. "Why should I not have a feather as well?" She grasped her sister's skirt, and at once she too was bound. All 3 stood clinging helplessly to the goose. In the morning the simpleton tucked the golden goose under his arm and set out, paying no heed to the 3 maidens who clung behind, stumbling and wailing. Through field and meadow he walked, and behind him trailed the strange procession. A parson, passing by, cried out, "Shame upon you, maidens, to chase after a youth in such fashion." He seized the youngest by the hand to drag her away, but the instant he touched her, he too was caught and had to follow. Soon came the sexton, astonished to see the parson in such plight. "Your reverence," he cried, "have you lost your dignity?" He grasped the parson's sleeve and was fastened as well. Then 2 peasants, hoeing in the field, came running at the parson's call for help. But when they laid hands on the others, they too were bound. So now 7 souls trooped behind the simpleton and his goose, step for step, through villages and lanes, to the laughter of all who saw. At length they came to a great town, where a king reigned who had a daughter, fair but solemn. She was famed for her beauty, but also for her sorrowful silence, for none had ever seen her smile. The king proclaimed that whoever could make her laugh should win her hand in marriage. Princes, nobles, and jesters had tried in vain. When the simpleton entered with his goose and his train of 7 clinging figures, the princess beheld the sight and burst into such laughter that it rang like silver bells through the hall. She laughed until she wept and could not stop. And so, by the king's decree, the simpleton had earned her hand. But the king, proud and unwilling to give his daughter to a poor fool, devised new trials. "First," he said, "bring me a man who can drink a whole cellar of wine." The simpleton went into the forest, and there he found a man groaning in thirst. "I have drunk a whole cask, yet my throat burns still." The simpleton led him to the king's cellar, where the man drank and drank until every vat was dry. Still the king objected. "Now bring me a man who can eat a mountain of bread." Again the simpleton returned to the forest, and there found a starving man bound by a strap. "I have devoured a bakehouse, yet I am empty still." The The simpleton brought him to the king's courtyard, where a mountain of bread awaited. In one day he ate it all. Yet again the king sought to delay. "Fetch me a ship that can sail alike on land and water. Only then shall you have my daughter." The simpleton sought the forest once more, and the little gray man appeared. "I have helped you drink and eat," said he, "and now I will help you once more, for you showed me kindness when none else would. Here is the ship that sails both land and sea." The simpleton sailed it proudly to the palace gates. Seeing this, the king could resist no longer. The marriage was held with great rejoicing, and when the king died, the simpleton became king in his stead, ruling wisely with his beloved queen by his side. Thus the despised fool, through kindness and patience, rose to honor and happiness, and lived long in peace. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. First story, expanded. Once upon a time, there lived an old fox, a creature already bent with years, who bore 9 long and splendid tails. Yet though he seemed wise and content, a shadow of doubt settled upon his heart. He began to believe that his wife, fair Mistress Fox, might no longer be faithful to him. Eager to test her, he laid a cunning plan. One morning, he stretched himself beneath the wooden bench, lay stiff and silent, and pretended to be stone dead. Upstairs, Mistress Fox went into her chamber, locked the door, and sat sighing in loneliness. Below, by the fire, sat her maid, Miss Cat, who stirred the pots and prepared the meals. When whispers spread through the forest that old Mr. Fox was dead, suitors from near and far hastened to try their luck. The first to knock upon the door was a young fox with fur bright as autumn leaves. He tapped gently and called, "What are you about, Miss Cat? Do you slumber or do you chat?" The cat replied with a purr, "I slumber not, I wake indeed. I stir the pot for mistress's need. Warm beer with butter rich I brew. Would you not come and sip it too?" "No, thank you, kind miss," said the fox. "But tell me, how fares Mistress Fox?" The maid answered in mournful rhyme, "She sits alone in her chamber small. Her tears like raindrops downward fall. Her little eyes are swollen red, because old Master Fox lies dead." "Then pray," said the young wooer, "announce me, for I would gladly win her hand." Up the stairs Miss Cat went, her paws pattering trip, trap, while her golden rings jingled. She knocked thrice. Tap, tap, tap. "Mistress Fox, are you inside?" "Oh yes, my little cat," she cried. "A wooer waits upon the stair. Now tell me, child, what shape and air?" The maid replied, "He is a fox, yet has but one tail." Mistress Fox shook her head. "Then I will have none of him, for my late husband bore 9 fine tails, and I shall take no lesser." So Miss Cat sent the wooer away. Soon another came, and then another. Each bore 2 tails, 3 tails, 4, and more. Yet still Mistress Fox refused them all. None seemed worthy. Until at last there came a stately fox with 9 splendid tails, flowing like plumes behind him. When Mistress Fox heard this, she clapped her paws with joy. "Now open the gates, the doors throw wide, bring forth the old fox, though he died. Carry him out without delay, for a wedding feast begins today." But scarcely had the words been spoken, when old Mr. Fox, who had lain all the while beneath the bench, sprang to life. His 9 tails bristled, his eyes flashed fire, and he seized a cudgel. With angry blows he drove out the rabble of wooers, and even Mistress Fox herself, and sent them fleeing from the house in shame. Second story, expanded. In another telling, the tale ran differently. This time, old Mr. Fox truly was dead, and his house stood silent in mourning. Mistress Fox sat upstairs, her eyes red from weeping, while faithful Miss Cat tended the fire and stirred milk and bread into a sweet broth. Then came a knock. At the door stood a great gray wolf, proud and tall. He bowed low and sang out, good day, dear cat of Carrowit. Why do you by the hearthstone sit? What tasty dish do you prepare to scent the room and warm the air?" Miss Cat replied, "In milk I crumble bread so white. Would you, dear sir, partake a bite?" "No, thank you kindly," said the wolf. "But tell me, where is Mistress Fox? Is she not at home?" And the cat answered in rhyme, "She sits above in her lonely room, lamenting her sorrow, bewailing her doom. Her heart is heavy, her tears fall sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more." "Then," said the wolf, "go and ask if she would care for a husband bold." Ah, up the stairs ran the cat, her tail flicking this way and that, her golden rings chiming as she knocked upon the parlor door. "Are you within, good Mistress Fox? A suitor stands at your door and knocks. Would you care for a husband now? Then kindly step below and bow." "Tell me," asked Mistress Fox, "does he wear red stockings, and has he a pointed snout?" "No," answered the cat. "Then he will not do for me." The wolf went away, and in his place came many more. First a dog, then a proud stag, a quick hare, a roaring bear, a mighty lion, and nearly every beast of the forest. Yet each time one small grace was lacking, a red stocking, a pointed mouth, a fox's manner. And so each wooer was dismissed. At last there came a young fox, handsome and slender. Miss Cat ran to the chamber door once more. "Mistress Fox, a fine young fox awaits. He has red stockings upon his legs, and his mouth is sharp and pointed." At this news, Mistress Fox rose at once. "Then let him come upstairs, for he alone pleases me." She commanded Miss Cat to prepare the hall. "Quickly now, sweep the room so clean, open the window, let in the sheen. Fling out the old fox, lay him to rest, though many a mouse he caught with zest. Not once of me did he think at all, but ate each morsel, fat and small." So the chamber was set in order, the old fox was carried out, and the young fox was welcomed in. Soon the wedding feast began, the music played, and the beasts of the forest came to dance. And they danced, and they sang, and they feasted so merrily that if they have not tired of it yet, they are surely still dancing to this very day. The Thief and His Master. There once lived a man named Hans, who was poor in wealth but rich in worries. He had but one son, and like many fathers before him, he desired to see the boy established in a trade, so that he might not wander idle through the world. But Hans was uncertain which trade would bring the greatest fortune. In his trouble, he turned, as was common in those days, to the church. He entered quietly, bent his knees before the altar, and prayed earnestly to the Lord God to grant him wisdom. "Show me, O Lord," said Hans, "what path shall be most prosperous for my son, that he may not starve, but live in honor." Now, as he prayed, the clerk, who had hidden himself behind the altar, thinking to make sport, whispered in a sharp voice, "Thieving, thieving." Hans, trembling, believed it to be the answer of heaven itself. He rose from the stone floor, crossed himself, and went home, heavy of heart, yet resolved. He said to his son, "My child, the Lord has spoken. You are to learn the craft of thieving, for so it is ordained." The boy, though surprised, trusted his father, and so together they set out to seek a master in so dark an art. They wandered long upon lonely roads, through fields and villages, until at last they came to a vast forest. In the shadow of its trees, they spied a small, crooked house. Within dwelt an old woman, wrinkled and wise, who listened to their tale. "If you seek a teacher," said she, "you have come to the right place. My own son is a master thief, skilled beyond all others. He can teach the lad well." Hans, half fearful and half hopeful, spoke with the master thief. "Can you truly teach him all there is to know?" The man smiled, his eyes gleaming. "I can teach him as none else can. But hear the bargain, return after a year. If you can recognize your son, you shall pay me nothing. If you fail, then you must give me $200. Hans, bound by the strange command he had received in church, agreed and went home. The boy remained in the forest and learned not only the art of stealing, but witchcraft, cunning transformations, and secrets of shape and shadow. Under the master's care, he grew swift as a fox, watchful as an owl, and sly as a serpent. The year passed swiftly, and Hans, who had counted each day, grew anxious, for he knew not how he might recognize his son again, should magic conceal him. One day, as he walked sorrowful along the road, he met a dwarf, small of stature but sharp of eye. The little man asked, "Hans, why is your brow so furrowed, and why do you sigh as though the wind bore all your burdens?" Hans told him of the bargain, and how he feared to lose both his son and his money. The dwarf said, "Take heart, carry with you a basket of black bread. When you stand beneath the chimney of the master's house, look to the crossbeam. There you will see a basket, and from it a little bird will peep. That bird is none other than your son." Hans followed the counsel. He crept beneath the chimney, set the basket of bread upon the floor, and lo, from the hanging basket a small bird hopped forth to peck at the crumbs. "Hullo, my son, art thou here?" cried Hans. The bird fluttered with joy, and in a moment the youth stood before him once more. The master thief, who had trusted his spells, grew pale. "The devil must have aided you. No man could have known him otherwise." But Hans clasped his son's hand, saying, "Come, let us go home." And the two set out together. Yet the boy had not learned his arts in vain. As they walked, a grand carriage came rolling by upon the road. "Father," said the youth, "I shall turn into a greyhound. Sell me to the gentleman in the carriage, and you will gain silver. Fear not, for I will return." At once he leapt, and where the boy had stood, a sleek greyhound ran beside Hans. The gentleman, seeing the fine beast, called out, "Good man, will you sell me your dog?" Hans agreed, asking $30. The price was high, but the gentleman, admiring the dog, paid it. Yet scarcely had the carriage gone a short distance when the hound sprang out of the window and returned to his father, resuming his true shape. The next day was a fair in the town nearby. "Now, father," said the youth, "I will become a splendid horse. Sell me if you can, but mark this well. Remove the bridle, or I cannot return to myself." So saying, he transformed into a horse, so strong and beautiful that all eyes at the fair turned toward it. Hans led the horse through the crowd, and who should come but the very master thief himself. He gave $100 and claimed the horse, but Hans, in his forgetfulness, left the bridle on its head. The master laughed, drove the horse to his own house, and shut it in the stable. Now, when the maid came across the threshold, the horse spoke in a low voice. "Take off my bridle, take it off quickly." The maid, astonished, said, "Canst thou speak?" But her heart was moved, and she loosed the bridle. At once the horse vanished, and in its place a sparrow fluttered up and out into the open air. The master, skilled in wicked arts, turned likewise into a sparrow and gave chase. Higher and higher they flew, till at last they cast lots in the wind. Twice the master lost, and in anger changed himself into a fish, diving into the river. But the youth, too, became a fish, swift as silver, and again the master lost. Then the master turned into a cock, crowing loud upon the bank. But the youth, quick of wit, became a fox and leapt upon him. With sharp teeth he bit off the cock's head, and thus the master thief perished, and has remained dead to this very day. Hans and his son returned home safely, richer in coin and wiser in craft. And though men whispered of the strange things the boy had learned, Hans only said, "What is taught may be turned to good, if a man has wit enough." The Old Beggar-Woman. There was once an old woman, wrinkled and bent, who wandered from village to village with a staff in her hand and a bundle of rags upon her back. Perhaps you have seen such a one before, for there are many who live by begging. And she begged likewise. Wherever she went, she lifted her trembling hand and said in a thin, quavering voice, "A crust of bread, a sip of milk, a kind word for the love of God." And whenever she received anything at all, no matter how small, she bowed her head low and whispered, "May God reward you 100-fold." Thus she walked on, day after day, through mud and dust, through heat and frost. One winter's evening, when the wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the snow swept across the road in thick, white veils, the poor woman came to a small house at the edge of a village. She leaned wearily on her staff and knocked upon the door, hoping for shelter. Through the chinks of the shutters, she saw a flicker of firelight, warm and golden. Within there stood a boy, lively and sharp-eyed, a mischievous rogue with a kind heart. He had been warming his hands before the blaze, and when he opened the door, the glow fell upon his face. The boy looked upon the old woman, who shivered as though the cold had crept into her very bones. He said cheerfully, "Come inside, old mother, and warm yourself, for no one should stand freezing at another man's door." Grateful, she stepped across the threshold, bowed once more, and went straight toward the hearth. She drew so near that the sparks leapt and the firelight licked at her ragged clothes. Her garments, dry and thin as tinder, began to smolder, though she did not notice it, for the warmth was sweet after the bitter cold. Now the boy stood and watched. He saw how the flames curled higher, biting at the edges of her skirt and creeping up the folds of her sleeve. A wiser child might have leapt at once, fetched water, or beat down the fire with his hands. For is it not true? Indeed, who could deny it? That when another is in peril, even a child must do what is right. If he had no bucket at hand, then let him cry out, or call his father, or fling a blanket upon her. And if all else failed, should he not have wept so fiercely that his very tears might have poured down like two clear streams to quench the hungry fire? But the boy lingered, half amused, half fearful, his feet rooted to the spot. He thought perhaps that the flames would die down of themselves. He thought, perhaps, that it was not his task to tend to the old beggar-woman. And so the rags blazed brighter, the sparks flew higher, and the peril grew greater with every heartbeat. And here, dear listener, the tale pauses to ask, what becomes of kindness if it is only a word and not a deed? For a tongue may speak sweetly, and a door may be opened wide, yet if the hand does not act when danger is near, the blessing may turn to sorrow, and mercy may burn away like straw in the fire. The Shepherd Boy. Once upon a time, in a quiet valley hemmed in by dark woods and rolling hills, there lived a shepherd boy of no great fortune, but of uncommon wit. His flocks were small, and his clothing plain, yet the people of the neighboring villages spoke his name with a kind of wonder. For no riddle was too twisted for his tongue, and no question too deep for his quick mind. Many came to test him, merchants on their way to distant fairs, millers waiting for their grain to grind, even gray-haired priests passing along the road, and all went away astonished at the boy's clever answers, which were as bright and sharp as frost on a winter morning. Word of this unusual child did not stop at the village boundary. It drifted outward like smoke rising from a chimney until it reached the court of the king himself. The king, who was proud and liked to think no one in his realm was wiser than he, did not believe the stories. "A shepherd boy?" he said to his counselors. "A mere child with bare feet and a crook in his hand? We shall see." And he sent for the boy to be brought before him. So the boy left his flocks and came to the royal palace, which glittered with marble floors and banners, bright as the sky after rain. When the king saw him, he leaned forward on his throne, his crown heavy with jewels, and said, "I have heard of your fame, little shepherd, but I believe only what I see. If you can give me answers to 3 questions which I will ask you, I shall take you into my household as my own son, and you shall dwell here in the palace beside me." The boy bowed low and said, "Your Majesty, what are the 3 questions?" Then the king spoke the first question. "Tell me, how many drops of water are there in the great ocean?" The boy raised his eyes and answered without trembling. "My lord king," said he, "if you will command that all the rivers and streams of the earth be dammed so that not a single drop flows into the sea until I have counted them, then I shall tell you exactly how many drops lie hidden in its depths." The king frowned slightly, for he saw the wisdom in the boy's words, and said, "Then listen to the second question. Tell me, how many stars are shining in the sky?" The boy asked for a great sheet of clean white paper. When it was brought, he took a fine pen and made on it so many delicate dots, so small they were like dust motes floating in a sunbeam, that no one could count them without losing their sight. The paper shimmered as if it held a piece of the heavens themselves. Then the boy held it up and said, "As many stars are scattered across the sky as there are points upon this paper. Count them if you wish." But no one dared, for the points were beyond all reckoning. The king was silent for a moment, and then he spoke the third question, the deepest of all. "Tell me, how many seconds of time are there in eternity?" The shepherd boy's eyes grew distant, as though he were gazing far beyond the palace walls, and he said softly, "In Lower Pomerania there stands the Diamond Mountain, which is 2.5 miles high, 2.5 miles wide, and 2.5 miles deep. Every 100 years, a tiny bird comes and sharpens its beak upon the stone. When at last the whole mountain has been worn away to nothing by the touch of that small bird, then the first second of eternity shall be over." At this, the great hall fell still as winter. The courtiers glanced at one another, and then at the king, whose proud face softened. He rose from his throne and placed his hand upon the boy's shoulder. "You have answered my 3 questions as no man of my court could have done," said he. "From this day forth you shall live with me in my palace, and I will treat you as my own child." And so the shepherd boy, who had once watched his sheep beneath the open sky, came to dwell within marble halls, yet never lost the clear eyes and wise heart that had carried him from the pastures to the throne room. And many whispered that the kingdom itself grew wiser for having him there. Bearskin. Once, long ago, in a land of war and wandering, there lived a young fellow of sturdy frame and steadfast heart. He had gone to serve as a soldier, and from the first day he bore himself with a courage that startled even his comrades. When bullets whistled and iron rained down like hail from a blackened sky, he was always foremost, his musket steady, his eyes bright and unafraid. Through long marches and bitter winters he endured, and so long as the war raged, his life had shape and meaning. The clang of swords and the roll of drums were his daily bread. But wars, like storms, do not last forever. Peace was declared at last, and with the silence of the cannons came dismissal. The captain called him, clapped him on the shoulder, and said, "You have served bravely, lad. Now go where you will." The young man bowed, but his heart sank. His parents were dead, his childhood home sold. No hearth, no roof, no kin awaited him. He turned, therefore, to his brothers, hoping that blood would be warmer than strangers' hearts. "Keep me with you until war comes again," he begged, but his brothers were hard and close-fisted. "What can we do with thee?" they said. "Thou art of no use. Go make a living for thyself." Their words were like cold iron. The door closed upon him. He had nothing left but his old musket. He slung it over his shoulder and went forth into the world, his boots thin, his stomach empty. He wandered across a wide, wind-beaten heath, where only a ring of twisted trees broke the horizon. Beneath them he sat, heavy with grief, and spoke to himself. "I have no coin," he murmured. "I have learned no craft but that of war. And now they have made peace, none wants me. I see before me hunger and misery." As he sat thus, lost in thought, a rustling stirred the leaves. He looked up, and before him stood a stranger clad in a rich green coat, his face stately yet strange, and his foot, when it peeped from beneath the hem, was cloven like a goat's. "I know already what thou art in need of," said the man in a voice smooth as silk and deep as a cavern. "Gold and possessions shalt thou have, as much as thou canst spend. Do what thou wilt. But first I must know if thou art fearless, for I bestow my gifts not in vain." "A soldier and fear, how can those two things go together?" cried the young man. "Put me to the proof." "Very well," answered the stranger. "Look behind thee." The soldier turned. Out from the scrub lumbered a bear, huge and shaggy, growling so that the earth trembled. "Oh ho!" shouted the soldier. "I'll tickle thy muzzle so thou shalt lose thy fancy for growling." He leveled his musket, fired, and the beast fell with a crash and stirred no more. "I see," said the stranger, nodding slowly, "that thou art not lacking in courage, but another condition thou must fulfill." "If it endanger not my salvation," replied the soldier, whose blood chilled a little, for he knew well who stood before him, "then I am willing. If it does, I'll have nothing to do with it." "Thou shalt look to that thyself," said the greencoat. "For the next 7 years thou shalt neither wash thyself, nor comb thy hair or beard, nor cut thy nails, nor utter a single paternoster. In return, I will give thee a coat and a cloak which thou must wear. If thou diest within the 7 years, thou art mine. If thou livest, thou art free, and rich for all thy days." The soldier thought of his emptiness, of nights without bread, of his long comradeship with death in the field. He clenched his jaw, looked the stranger in the eye, and agreed. The devil, for such he was, slipped off his green coat and held it forth. "If thou wearest this coat," he said, "and puttest thy hand into the pocket, thou wilt always find it full of money." Then he stripped the hide from the fallen bear. "This shall be thy cloak and thy bed. On it shalt thou sleep, and in no other bed shalt thou lie. Because of it, men shall call thee Bearskin." And with that, the devil vanished like mist. The soldier drew on the green coat and felt in the pocket. Gold clinked there in heaps. He wrapped himself in the bearskin, rose, and went into the world. He refrained from nothing that pleased him, though his purse groaned, and yet he gave freely to the poor, that they might pray for his life during the 7 dread years. In the first year his appearance was tolerable. In the second he began to look monstrous, his hair and beard matted into a wild mane, his fingers hooked like claws, his skin so thick with grime that, as folk said, cress might sprout upon it. People fled at his coming, yet because he paid richly, and because his alms bought prayers, doors opened to him even as faces turned away. In the 4th year he came to an inn. The host, seeing him, would give neither bed nor stall, fearing his horses would be frightened. But Bearskin's hand plunged into his pocket and came up with ducats. The host relented and put him in a lonely outhouse, extracting a promise that no guest should see him, lest the inn gain a bad name. That evening Bearskin sat alone, longing from the bottom of his heart for the 7 years to pass. Through the thin wall he heard loud weeping. His heart, though buried under filth and fur, was still compassionate. He opened the door. Inside was an old man, gray-headed and trembling, wringing his hands. At sight of Bearskin, he shrank back in terror, but the soldier spoke gently, and at last the man listened. "My fortune has dwindled away," the old man confessed. "My 3 daughters and I must starve. I am so poor I cannot pay the innkeeper, and am to be cast into prison." "If that be all," said Bearskin, "I have gold enough." He summoned the innkeeper, paid every farthing, and pressed a purse full of coins into the old man's hand. The old man, astonished and overjoyed, said, "Come with me. My daughters are each a marvel of beauty. Choose one for thy wife. When she hears what thou hast done, she will not refuse thee. Thou dost indeed look strange, but she will set thee right again." Bearskin went. When the eldest saw him, she shrieked and fled. The second gazed and said, "How can I wed one who has lost his human form? The shaven bear that once came here in a hussar's coat pleased me more, for at least it wore gloves. If it were only ugliness, I might grow used to it." But the youngest said softly, "Dear father, he must be a good man to help you thus. If you have promised him a bride, the promise must be kept." It was pity that Bearskin's face was hidden under hair and grime, else they might have seen his joy. He drew a ring from his finger, broke it, and gave her 1/2, keeping the other. He wrote his name on her piece and hers on his. "Keep it well," he said. "I must wander 3 years more. If I return not, thou art free, for I shall be dead. Pray God to preserve my life." The poor betrothed dressed herself all in black and wept often. Her sisters mocked her. "Beware, if thou givest him thy hand, he will strike his claws into it. Bears like sweet things, he will eat thee up. Thou must do always as he likes, or he will growl. But at least the wedding will be merry, for bears dance well." She bore their jeers in silence. Meanwhile, Bearskin roamed the world, doing good where he might, scattering gold so the poor would pray for him. At last, the final day of the 7th year dawned. He went again to the heath and sat beneath the circle of trees. The wind whistled, and the devil appeared, scowling. He flung Bearskin the old coat. "Give me back mine," he demanded. "We have not come so far," said Bearskin. "First make me clean." Whether he liked it or not, the devil fetched water, washed Bearskin, combed his hair, and cut his nails. When he was done, the soldier stood handsome and brave, fairer than he had ever been. Light-hearted, Bearskin went into the town, donned a velvet coat, seated himself in a carriage with 4 white horses, and drove to his bride's house. None knew him. The father took him for a great general and seated him between his 2 eldest daughters. They poured his wine and gave him the choicest meats, thinking never had they seen a handsomer man. The youngest sat opposite in her black dress, eyes cast down, silent. At length he asked the father for one of his daughters. The 2 eldest hurried away to deck themselves, each believing she was the chosen one. The stranger, alone with the youngest, dropped his half-ring into a glass of wine and handed it to her. She drank, saw the ring at the bottom, and trembled. She drew forth her own half, worn on a ribbon about her neck. The pieces fitted perfectly. "I am thy bridegroom," said he softly, "whom thou sawest as Bearskin. By God's grace, I am a man again." He took her in his arms and kissed her. When the sisters returned in their finery and learned the truth, rage and envy seized them. One threw herself into the well, the other hanged herself upon a tree. That evening, a knock sounded. The bridegroom opened the door, and there stood the devil in his green coat. He smiled with his teeth. "Seest thou," he said, "I have now 2 souls in the place of thy one." And he vanished into the night. Thus ended the tale of Bearskin, who risked filth and shame for 7 years, yet by steadfastness, almsgiving, and the mercy of God came forth clean, rich, and blessed. The singing, springing lark. There was once on a time a man who was about to set out on a long journey, and on parting he asked his 3 daughters what he should bring back with him for them. Whereupon the eldest wished for pearls, the second wished for diamonds, but the third said, "Dear father, I should like a singing, soaring lark." The father said, "Yes, if I can get it, you shall have it," kissed all 3, and set out. Now, when the time had come for him to be on his way home again, he had brought pearls and diamonds for the 2 eldest, but he had sought everywhere in vain for a singing, soaring lark for the youngest, and he was very unhappy about it, for she was his favorite child. Then his road lay through a forest, and in the midst of it was a splendid castle. And near the castle stood a tree, but quite on the top of the tree he saw a singing, soaring lark. "Aha, you come just at the right moment," he said, quite delighted, and called to his servant to climb up and catch the little creature. But as he approached the tree, a lion leapt from beneath it, shook himself, and roared till the leaves on the trees trembled. "He who tries to steal my singing, soaring lark," he cried, "will I devour." Then the man said, "I did not know that the bird belonged to thee. I will make amends for the wrong I have done, and ransom myself with a large sum of money, only spare my life." The lion said, "Nothing can save thee, unless thou wilt promise to give me for mine own what first meets thee on thy return home. And if thou wilt do that, I will grant thee thy life, and thou shalt have the bird for thy daughter, into the bargain." But the man hesitated and said, "That might be my youngest daughter. She loves me best, and always runs to meet me on my return home." The servant, however, was terrified and said, "Why should your daughter be the very one to meet you? It might as easily be a cat or dog." Then the man allowed himself to be over-persuaded, took the singing, soaring lark, and promised to give the lion whatsoever should first meet him on his return home. When he reached home and entered his house, the first who met him was no other than his youngest and dearest daughter, who came running up, kissed and embraced him. And when she saw that he had brought with him a singing, soaring lark, she was beside herself with joy. The father, however, could not rejoice, but began to weep, and said, "My dearest child, I have bought the little bird dear. In return for it, I have been obliged to promise thee to a savage lion, and when he has thee, he will tear thee in pieces and devour thee." And he told her all, just as it had happened, and begged her not to go there, come what might. But she consoled him and said, "Dearest father, indeed your promise must be fulfilled. I will go thither and soften the lion, so that I may return to thee safely." Next morning she had the road pointed out to her, took leave, and went fearlessly out into the forest. The lion, however, was an enchanted prince, and was by day a lion, and all his people were lions with him. But in the night they resumed their natural human shapes. On her arrival, she was kindly received and led into the castle. When night came, the lion turned into a handsome man, and their wedding was celebrated with great magnificence. They lived happily together, remained awake at night, and slept in the daytime. One day he came and said, "Tomorrow there is a feast in thy father's house, because your eldest sister is to be married, and if thou art inclined to go there, my lions shall conduct thee." She said, "Yes, I should very much like to see my father again," and went thither accompanied by the lions. There was great joy when she arrived, for they had all believed that she had been torn in pieces by the lion, and had long ceased to live. But she told them what a handsome husband she had, and how well off she was, remained with them while the wedding feast lasted, and then went back again to the forest. When the second daughter was about to be married, and she was again invited to the wedding, she said to the lion, "This time I will not be alone. Thou must come with me." The lion, however, said that it was too dangerous for him, for if when there a ray from a burning candle fell on him, he would be changed into a dove, and for 7 years long would have to fly about with the doves. She said, "Ah, but do come with me. I will take great care of thee, and guard thee from all light." So they went away together, and took with them their little child as well. She had a chamber built there, so strong and thick that no ray could pierce through it. In this he was to shut himself up when the candles were lit for the wedding feast. But the door was made of green wood, which warped and left a little crack which no one noticed. The wedding was celebrated with magnificence, but when the procession with all its candles and torches came back from church and passed by this apartment, a ray about the breadth of a hair fell on the king's son. And when this ray touched him, he was transformed in an instant. And when she came in and looked for him, she did not see him, but a white dove was sitting there. The dove said to her, "For 7 years must I fly about the world, but at every 7th step that you take, I will let fall a drop of red blood and a white feather. and these will show thee the way. And if thou followest the trace, thou canst release me. Die." Thereupon the dove flew out at the door, and she followed him, and at every 7th step a red drop of blood and a little white feather fell down and showed her the way. So she went continually further and further in the wide world, never looking about her or resting, and the 7 years were almost past. Then she rejoiced and thought that they would soon be delivered, and yet they were so far from it. Once, when they were thus moving onwards, no little feather and no drop of red blood fell, and when she raised her eyes, the dove had disappeared. And as she thought to herself, "In this no man can help thee," she climbed up to the sun and said to him, "Thou shinest into every crevice and over every peak. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the sun, "I have seen none, but I present thee with a casket. Open it when thou art in sorest need." Oh, then she thanked the sun, and went on until evening came, and the moon appeared. She then asked her, "Thou shinest the whole night through, and on every field and forest, hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the moon, "I have seen no dove, but here I give thee an egg. Break it when thou art in great need." She thanked the moon, and went on until the night wind came up and blew on her. Then she said to it, "Thou blowest over every tree, and under every leaf. Hast thou not seen a white dove flying?" "No," said the night wind, "I have seen none, but I will ask the 3 other winds. Perhaps they have seen it." The east wind and the west wind came, and had seen nothing, but the south wind said, "I have seen the white dove. It has flown to the Red Sea, where it has become a lion again, for the 7 years are over, and the lion is there fighting with a dragon. The dragon, however, is an enchanted princess. The night wind then said to her, "I will advise thee. Go to the Red Sea. On the right bank are some tall reeds. Count them, break off the 11th, and strike the dragon with it. Then the lion will be able to subdue it, and both then will regain their human form. After that, look round, and thou wilt see the griffin which is by the Red Sea. Swing thyself with thy beloved onto his back, and the bird will carry you over the sea to your own home. Here is a nut for thee. When thou art above the center of the sea, let the nut fall. It will immediately shoot up, and a tall nut tree will grow out of the water on which the griffin may rest. For if he cannot rest, he will not be strong enough to carry you across, and if thou forgettest to throw down the nut, he will let you fall into the sea." Then she went thither, and found everything as the night wind had said. She counted the reeds by the sea, and cut off the 11th, struck the dragon therewith, whereupon the lion overcame it, and immediately both of them regained their human shapes. But when the princess, who had before been the dragon, was delivered from enchantment, she took the youth by the arm, seated herself on the griffin, and carried him off with her. There stood the poor maiden who had wandered so far and was again forsaken. She sat down and cried, but at last she took courage and said, "Still I will go as far as the wind blows, and as long as the cock crows, until I find him." And she went forth by long, long roads, until at last she came to the castle where both of them were living together. There she heard that soon a feast was to be held, in which they would celebrate their wedding. But she said, "God still helps me," and opened the casket that the sun had given her. A dress lay therein as brilliant as the sun itself. So she took it out and put it on, and went up into the castle, and everyone, Even the bride herself looked at her with astonishment. The dress pleased the bride so well that she thought it might do for her wedding dress, and asked if it was for sale. "Not for money or land," answered she, "but for flesh and blood." The bride asked her what she meant by that, so she said, "Let me sleep a night in the chamber where the bridegroom sleeps." The bride would not, yet wanted very much to have the dress. At last she consented, but the page was to give the prince a sleeping draught. When it was night, therefore, and the youth was already asleep, she was led into the chamber. She seated herself on the bed and said, "I have followed after thee for 7 years. I have been to the sun and the moon and the 4 winds, and have inquired for thee, and have helped thee against the dragon. Wilt thou then quite forget me?" But the prince slept so soundly that it only seemed to him as if the wind were whistling outside in the fir trees. When therefore day broke, she was led out again, and had to give up the golden dress. And as that even had been of no avail, she was sad, went out into a meadow, sat down there, and wept. While she was sitting there, she thought of the egg which the moon had given her. She opened it, and there came out a clucking hen with 12 chickens, all of gold, and they ran about chirping, and crept again under the old hen's wings. Nothing more beautiful was ever seen in the world. Then she arose, and drove them through the meadow before her, until the bride looked out of the window. The little chickens pleased her so much that she immediately came down and asked if they were for sale. "Not for money or land, but for flesh and blood. Let me sleep another night in the chamber where the bridegroom sleeps." The bride said, "Yes," intending to cheat her as on the former evening. But when the prince went to bed, he asked the page what the murmuring and rustling in the night had been. On this the page told all, that he had been forced to give him a sleeping draught, because a poor girl had slept secretly in the chamber, and that he was to give him another that night. The prince said, "Pour out the draught by the bedside." At night she was again led in, and when she began to relate how ill all had fared with her, he immediately recognized his beloved wife by her voice, sprang up and cried, "Now I really am released. I have been as it were in a dream, for the strange princess has bewitched me, so that I have been compelled to forget thee. But God has delivered me from the spell at the right time." Then they both left the castle secretly in the night, for they feared the father of the princess, who was a sorcerer, and they seated themselves on the griffin which bore them across the Red Sea. And when they were in the midst of it, she let fall the nut. Immediately a tall nut tree grew up, whereon the bird rested, and then carried them home, where they found their child, who had grown tall and beautiful, and they lived thenceforth happily until their death. The Nail. Once, in days not too near and not too far, there lived a merchant who was well known in many towns for his sharp mind, quick bargaining, and honest weights. He would travel from fair to fair, across valleys and rivers, through thick forests and open plains, and wherever he spread out his cloth and displayed his wares, people gathered round. For he dealt not in trifles only, but in sturdy goods, in shining tools, and in silks that shimmered like water at sunset. And so, at the great fair which was held once a year, he prospered more than ever before. From morning until evening the customers came, and by the time the bells of the town rang the closing hour, his purse bulged with gold and silver. His eyes sparkled, for he thought of his home, of his wife waiting by the hearth, of his children who would leap to see the coins he brought, and of the fine supper he might enjoy before night had fallen. When all was sold and the stall was cleared, the merchant packed his trunk with the money, tied it fast upon his horse, and mounted. "If fortune is kind, I shall sleep under my own roof tonight," he said, urging his beast along the road. The sun climbed high, and the miles passed swiftly under hoof. At noon, he came to a small town, where he watered and fed the horse, and himself took bread and ale in the inn. When he was ready to ride again, the stable boy led the animal forth, and said with a bow, "Good sir, a nail is missing in the shoe of the left hind foot." "Let it be missing," replied the merchant, impatient and eager to be gone. "The shoe will hold well enough for the 6 miles that still lie before me. I am in haste." And with that, he tossed the boy a coin, sprang into the saddle, and rode out without another thought. The day wore on, the road wound through wood and meadow, and the merchant pressed his horse steadily. By mid-afternoon, he came to another inn, where he thought to give the beast some rest and grain. Again, a stable boy looked over the horse and came into the room with a troubled face. "Sir," said he, "the shoe of the left hind foot is gone entirely. Shall I take him at once to the blacksmith, who can fasten a new one?" "Let it still be wanting," answered the merchant with a wave of his hand. "It is but 2 miles farther, and my horse can well endure so little. I must not tarry. I long for my bed and my hearth." So he mounted again and set off. But scarcely had the town fallen behind him when the horse began to limp, slow at first, then heavy. Soon it stumbled upon the stones. The merchant urged it on, but the stumbling grew worse. Then with a sharp cry the beast fell, and the sound of breaking bone was plain. The poor animal lay in the dust, its leg broken beyond all hope of mending. Now the merchant's heart sank, for the horse could go no further, and the trunk of money was heavy as stone. He loosed the straps, lifted the burden upon his own shoulders, and began the weary walk homeward. The sky grew dim, the woods grew dark, the owls called, and the path seemed longer with every step. His back ached beneath the weight, his feet stumbled in the ruts, and many a time he feared that thieves would spring from the shadows to take both trunk and life. Yet he trudged on, until at last, very late in the night, he reached his house. His wife ran out with a lantern, his children cried with joy, but he sank upon the bench, groaning, "That unlucky nail has brought me all this disaster." And so it was, for had he taken a moment's patience, had he listened to the stable boys, his horse would have been sound, his journey easy, and his arrival timely. But because he hurried, he found delay. Because he despised a small care, he suffered a great misfortune. Thus the tale is told, and thus the lesson is plain. Hasten slowly, for a single missing nail may overturn the journey of a day. The Peasant and the Devil. Once upon a time, in a village hemmed in by dark forests and wide meadows, there lived a peasant of uncommon sharpness. His eyes were keen as a hawk's, and his mind turned quicker than the wheel of a mill stream. Folks in the tavern whispered often of his cunning ways, and it was said that no bargain, however tricky, could ever make a fool of him. Yet of all the tales told about this man, the most wondrous is the one of how he outwitted the devil himself. It happened one autumn evening, when the peasant had been laboring in his field from dawn until twilight. His hands were blackened with soil, and his back ached from bending over the stubborn earth. As the sun sank and shadows stretched long, he gathered his tools and prepared to walk home. But lo, in the very heart of his field, he saw a strange glow, a red shimmer as though a fire smoldered without wood. Startled, he drew nearer, and there before him lay a heap of burning coals, and upon those coals sat a small black figure, twisted of limb, with eyes like embers and horns that curled like a goat's. It was the devil in person, no taller than a child, yet terrible to behold. "By my faith," cried the peasant, forcing courage into his voice, "thou dost indeed sit upon a treasure." "A treasure it is," said the little black one, with a grin that showed teeth sharp as sickle blades. "Beneath me lies more gold and silver than ever thou hast seen in thy days. It is enough to make thee lord of this whole valley." "The treasure lies in my ground," answered the peasant boldly, "and by right it belongs to me." "Thine it shall be," replied the devil, "if only thou wilt grant me my desire. For 2 years give me the half of all that thy field brings forth. Money I have in plenty, but I crave the fruits of the earth, fresh and green, which I cannot fashion in my fiery home." Now the peasant, though poor, was not greedy enough to leap blindly. He stroked his beard and pretended to weigh the matter, but already his mind was spinning with trickery. "So be it," said he at last, "but that no quarrel may arise between us. Let us strike the bargain plain. All that grows above the earth shall be thine, and all that swells beneath the soil shall be mine." The devil, believing himself clever, smote his hands together. "Done!" he cried, and vanished in a puff of sparks. The peasant went to his hut and laughed until the rafters shook, for he had sown not wheat nor barley, but turnips thick and heavy. When the season turned and harvest drew near, the devil returned, his step leaving scorched prints upon the soil. He strutted to the field, eager to gather his share, yet found naught but the broad yellow leaves of the turnips, limp and bitter. Meanwhile, the peasant, with great delight, dug up the fat roots that glowed like gold in the setting sun. "Thou hast outwitted me this once," snarled the devil, his tail lashing like a whip. "But next year the bargain shall be reversed. What grows beneath the soil is thine, but what rises above it shall be mine." The peasant bowed with false meekness. "As thou wilt," said he. But in his mind he already laid new plans. When spring came round again, he sowed not turnips, but golden wheat. The stalks grew tall, their heads heavy with grain, swaying like waves in the summer wind. When harvest came, the peasant took his sickle and cut the stalks close to the ground, bundling sheaves until his barn was bursting. The devil, grinning with expectation, strode once more into the field. But lo, there was nothing left for him but the stubble, dry and useless, while all the bounty had gone to the peasant's store. At this, the devil shrieked with fury. Flames burst from his nostrils, and the earth cracked beneath his feet. Down into a cleft of the rocks he leapt, howling, and vanished into the deep places of the world. The peasant stood laughing over his sheaves, the gold of the wheat gleaming brighter than any coin. Then he took his spade, went to the place where the burning coals had first glowed, and unearthed the devil's treasure. He filled his cart with silver and gold until the axles groaned, and drove it home with a song upon his lips. And so the crafty peasant grew rich beyond measure, while the devil was left tricked and mocked. To this day, when folks speak of cleverness, they say, "That is the way to cheat the devil." Old Sultan. Once there was a farmer who kept a faithful old dog named Sultan. The creature had served him well through many years, guarding the house by night and keeping watch over the fields by day. But time spares no living thing. Sultan had grown old and feeble, his strength wasted away, and worse still, he had lost every tooth in his mouth. He could no longer bite, nor hold fast even the smallest thief who might creep into the yard. One summer evening, as the sun was sinking, and the farmer stood at his doorway with his wife, he said in a rough voice, "Tomorrow I shall put an end to old Sultan. He has grown useless. He cannot guard, and he cannot fight. What good is a toothless hound?" The farmer's wife, who was kinder of heart, answered gently, "Surely we might spare him. Has he not served us faithfully these many years? When we slept, he kept watch. When we worked, he followed close behind. Let us give him a crust in his old age." But the man shook his head. "Hey, woman, you think too soft. Not a single thief fears him now. He lies in the sun and does no more than any stone in the road. He has eaten well enough all his life, and that was pay for service. Now his time is over, and I shall not feed him longer." Not far off, stretched in the dust, lay the poor dog himself, and his old ears caught every word. Sorrow filled his heart, for he knew that the morning would bring his death. He slunk away at dusk, creeping into the forest to seek counsel from his one friend, the wolf. "Comrade," said Sultan with a heavy sigh, "my master intends to kill me. I have grown weak, and tomorrow I shall be no more." The wolf, who bore him a certain fondness, replied, "Take courage, old gossip. I will help you. I have thought of a way to restore your master's favor. Early in the morning your master and mistress will go to make hay, and they will take their little child with them, for no one is left at home. They always lay the child in the shade under the hedge while they work. You must place yourself close by, as if to guard it. I will creep forth from the wood and snatch the child in my jaws. Then you must leap up, give chase with all your might, and pursue me as though you would tear me down. I shall let the child fall unharmed, and you will carry it back. Your master will think you have saved his dearest treasure. Then he will hold you in gratitude, and never again will he think of harm." The plan seemed good to the dog, and so it was done. In the morning the farmer screamed in terror when he saw the wolf racing across the field with his child. But old Sultan sprang up, barked with fury, and pursued him swiftly. The wolf dropped the little one, and Sultan bore it back to the trembling parents. Their joy was great. The farmer wept and stroked his faithful dog. "Never, never shall a hair of yours be harmed. You shall eat my bread as long as you live." Then he bade his wife hurry home, make a soft sop of bread and milk for Sultan, and fetch his own pillow from the bed, that the old hound might lie in comfort. From that day forth, Sultan wanted for nothing. Not long after, the wolf came to visit, proud that their scheme had prospered. "Well, gossip," said he, "now you will repay me. I shall steal one of your master's fat sheep, and you must wink an eye." But the dog answered firmly, "Do not hope it. I will remain true to my master till my death. I cannot betray him." The wolf thought the old dog jested, so in the dark of night he crept into the fold to take a sheep. But Sultan had warned the farmer of his plan, and the man lay in wait. With a heavy flail, he struck the thief till his hide smarted sore. The wolf fled, howling, and called back over his shoulder, "Wait, old rogue, you shall pay dearly for this." The next morning, he sent the wild boar to challenge the dog. "Come to the forest," said the boar, "and settle this quarrel with tooth and claw." Sultan was troubled, for he was old and weak. He sought friends to stand by him, but none would come save a cat with only 3 legs. The faithful creature limped beside him as they went forth. The cat, because her stump pained her, held her tail upright in the air. Now the wolf and the boar were waiting. When they spied their foes, they mistook the sight. They thought the cat's tail was a drawn sword, glinting in the sun. And when she hopped on 3 legs, they believed she stooped each time to pick up a stone to hurl at them. Fear seized them both. The boar crept into the thicket, and the wolf scrambled up a tree. When Sultan and the cat arrived, they saw no one. Only the boar's ear stuck out from the brush. The cat, seeing it twitch, thought it was a mouse and leapt upon it, biting with sharp teeth. The boar squealed and dashed away, crying, "The guilty one is up in the tree." Sultan and the cat looked up, and there sat the wolf, ashamed to the bone of his cowardice. He slunk down at last, begged pardon, and made peace with the faithful dog. And from that day forward, Sultan lived in honor, guarded by loyalty, and crowned with the respect that belongs to those who serve true till the end.